For most of my life, I knew that my eyesight wasn't great. I've worn glasses since I was a kid. But in my 20s, I learned that something more serious was going on. I was diagnosed with a condition that causes vision loss. At the time, nothing in my daily life felt different, but that's not where I am now. Hey friends, welcome back. And if you are new here, welcome. My name is John. I live in New York City. I have retinitis pigmentosa, which is a condition that causes vision loss over time. It progresses differently for everyone who has RP. In my case, it's been gradual. So in this video, I want to share what that gradual change has actually looked like for me. Not from a medical standpoint, just from real life. What I started noticing, what caught me off guard, and what I've learned along the way. The diagnosis came in 2012 after I had a test called an ERG. It stands for electroretinography, and it's one of the tests doctors use to confirm retinitis pigmentosa. When the results came back, the diagnosis was confirmed. I had RP, and I remember being told that this condition could eventually lead to blindness. At the time, that was a big thing to hear, but honestly, I didn't really know what to do with that information. I was referred to a center that provides services for people who are blind or have low vision. They showed me different adaptive tools that people use. One of them was a monocular. It is basically a handheld telescope that lets you see things that are far away. I remember looking through it and thinking, oh wow, this is actually kind of cool. I could read a street sign that is a block away. But most of the other services that they talked about didn't feel relevant to me at that point. My life still felt normal. I was driving, going out with friends, being in dim places at night, and doing everything I had always done. So even though I had this diagnosis, it didn't feel like my reality yet. I remember Googling retinitis pigmentosa and reading things like vision loss and eventual blindness. But even that was hard to grasp because the only idea of blindness I really had came from movies and TV shows, which was someone who couldn't see at all. And that wasn't my experience. At that point, RP felt more like a label that had been placed on me, not something I felt like I was living through yet. Over time, things started changing. And looking back now, there were signs of RP earlier in my life. I just didn't know what they meant at the time. Growing up, I loved sports, but tracking and following a baseball or football in the air was harder for me than it seemed to be for everyone else. I just assumed that my eyesight wasn't great. I never connected it to a medical condition. The same thing was true with night vision. Being in darker environments was always a little harder for me, but I thought that was just normal variations in eyesight. But as I got older, especially in my late 20s and early 30s, I started noticing more obvious changes. My peripheral vision was getting worse. I started bumping into things more often. Chair legs, table legs, things on the floor. I remember my brother telling me, stop bumping into things. Nighttime and dark spaces also became harder to navigate. During my commute to work, there was a section of sidewalk that felt really dark to me. Trees were covering the streetlights, and the ground there was uneven. I didn't want to trip, so I used a flashlight on my phone to see where I was going. Eventually, that wasn't bright enough, so I bought a handheld flashlight. Then I bought an even brighter one. I was slowly adapting without really thinking about it. But there were also a couple of moments where the changes became impossible to ignore. One time, I was at an amusement park with friends. We were walking into a ride and the queue line went through a cave, a really dark space. We stepped in from broad daylight into the cave and I just stopped. I couldn't see where the path was. I couldn't tell where the walls were. And I didn't know where my friends were at now. I just froze. I didn't feel like I could safely move forward. Eventually, someone behind me noticed and asked if I needed help. He took my arm and guided me through the line until I caught up with my friends. Moments like that started happening more often. Another moment that stood out to me happened years later after the pandemic lockdown when theaters reopened. I walked into a theater with friends, and the moment I stepped inside, I realized that something had changed. My first thought was simple. This didn't used to be like this. The room was so dark that I couldn't see where the aisles and seats were. Movie theaters were something I navigated easily my entire life growing up. But in that moment, I realized that I can't do it the same way anymore. And that's when I started realizing something. These changes weren't happening all at once. But when you compare where you are now to where you were 5 or maybe 10 years ago, the difference becomes very clear. As these changes became more noticeable, I started making adjustments little by little. Most of the times, it wasn't some big decision, at least in the beginning. It was just solving problems as they appeared. When certain paths felt dark, I took out my flashlight. When my peripheral vision became less reliable, I started scanning more intentionally, paying closer attention to what was happening around me, planning routes a little more carefully, being aware of lighting, and slowing down in environments where I knew the visibility would be difficult. None of these changes happened all at once. They were small adjustments that gradually became habits, and over time, those habits became part of how I move through the world now. One of the strangest things about gradual change is that you don't really see it day to day. It's only when you look back that the full picture starts to come into focus. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that this probably isn't just about vision. Sometimes, the things that shape us the most are the things we didn't realize while they were happening. Things that were just outside our awareness, right there in the blind spot. I'll see you in the next one.